You go to the next one. So we'll begin with kind of an overview of the community engagement process. So Deb, if we go to the next slide, this is a schedule of kind of what we went through. As Lindsay mentioned, we really began at the July 17th Park and Recreation Advisory Board meeting. At that time, we kind of introduced an evaluation system that we were looking at, trying to kind of objectively rank various potential uses that could go in the open space at Northam Park. As we discussed at that meeting, we followed this up with about a month-long community engagement effort. We did have focus on an online effort. We asked people to email in with their comments on the evaluation system, on how we were weighting things, on what we were considering, as well as potential uses. All in all, we received about 50 emails during that period. We also had Park and Rec staff present at various community events. So that included summer celebration. We had time out at the Northam Park Playground and Tremont Pool, talking to users out there. We did attend the farmers market in late July, and then we were also present at the National Night Out, which was hosted by the Upper Arlington Police Division in St. Agatha on August 1st. So again, I'm getting users who are very familiar with Northam Park. So Brooke, if you want to go to the next slide. As part of the community engagement effort, we did have several communications. So we did keep the Northam Park Project Improvements webpage up to date. We sent out postcards to 540 homes around Northam Park. It was also distributed at the library and pools. We sent updates to the flyer connection through the schools. We put a sign up on the existing building at Northam Park asking people to participate, and also sent updates through the City Insight, the activity link, e-news updates, as well as blog posts throughout the engagement period. If we go to the next slide, we'll give a summary on kind of the community engagement effort tonight, give you the update. After that, we will be moving forward with finalizing the bid documents to advertise and seek bids for the construction work on the project. It's currently tentatively scheduled to go before City Council November 13th and 20th. So the ordinance at that time, hopefully, assuming that we get good bids, that we're able to receive bids that are in budget, that we get complete bids, would be for the actual construction of the project. And just as a reminder on that, and we'll give an update on this at the end as well, but we would look at construction beginning early in 2024 with the intent to leave the tennis courts open through July, at which point they would be taken offline as well for the replacement, and the whole project wrapping up before the end of 2024. So Brooke, if you want to go to the next slide, we wanted to kind of give a real quick kind of overview of the evaluation process. So on the next slide is the potential uses that were originally proposed or considered for the open space. And again, these were based on recommendations from the 2018 comprehensive plan. With that, on the next slide, we have the weighted evaluation criteria. Again, we did this because we knew not all evaluation criteria needed to be considered equally. Some things were very important, had a lot of weight. You can see at the top of the list, does the use fit within the available space? We wanted to be realistic on if it was something that didn't fit, didn't work, that we were scoring appropriately. I'm kind of going on down to things that carried a lot less weight, but still needed consideration. So you can see we have down there the maintenance. Obviously, anything we're doing is going to have some maintenance with it, so we don't want to put too much weight, but it is something we wanted to consider. We did set these all up as kind of yes, no questions. So we're trying to, yes, did it meet the criteria? It received 2 points. If it was something we couldn't answer clearly, if it was kind of a maybe, we gave it 1 point. If it was a no, we gave it 0 points. On the next slide, we have the top 3 based on the initial scoring that were shared at the July 17th meeting. So you can see the first one is an open shelter. And I won't go into kind of all the criteria that we did that at the previous meeting, but certainly if there's any questions, we can go back over them. Open shelter was kind of the top scoring at that time. On the next slide, we have pickleball courts, which also scored really well through the evaluation criteria. And finally, the third one that was kind of at the top of the list was asphalt hard court tennis courts for public use in the open space. On the next slide, we did look at several other uses, but we're pretty distant from kind of the top 3 uses as far as the evaluation scoring went. So that'd be public basketball courts, sand volleyball, playground, skate park, and dog park. That did, quite a bit of separation from the top 3 uses. So that's all the information that was shared at the July 17th meeting. If we go to the next slide, we'd really like to focus on the community feedback we've received over the last month. So kind of in a summary, we really didn't receive any feedback on the evaluation questions, the weight, or the scoring as originally proposed. Not a lot of specific comments where people thought we were weighting something too heavily or too light. Not really any suggestions on other evaluation questions we should consider, or the original scoring. Not a lot of questions on that. So it seemed like people generally, either didn't put a lot of thought maybe into the scoring system, or didn't have a lot of comments, concerns on kind of how we were approaching it. I think the one exception that we did hear from some residents, there's a lot of desire to have an open shelter. That's something that's came up quite a bit. People thought it would be a great benefit to the park. There was a little bit of concern, as Debbie kind of alluded to in their introduction, that is this the best location for that? And it really comes down to a kind of a safety concern, that we want to provide the open shelter, but we want to do it in an area that's kind of easily monitored. It's very visible. We don't want to kind of create a place that's attractive to kind of hang out, but kind of be hidden from the general view of the park. So that is certainly something that we did consider as well. We did ask community members if they had recommendations on other potential uses that should be considered. And you can see the list on there. We had someone suggest a ping pong table, a couple comments regarding either a diving well to service Tremont Pool or a spray ground. And then kind of the other ones were a little more individualized suggestions, but an outdoor stage, BMX course, and we actually did get one suggestion for a beer garden in the park. With those, we all kind of great suggestions. None of them seem to be great fits for Northam Park. I don't think that's to say that they wouldn't be ruled out from elsewhere in the park system, except a beer garden, I would suppose. So, if we go to the next slide, I will say the majority of feedback we received, both through the email as well as in our conversations at the community outreach events, really kind of focused on the top three uses. I mean, the majority of comments related to either pickleball, tennis, or kind of open space in the park. So we kind of put a summary down here of the comments that we did receive. So we had many residents kind of reaching out and stressing the importance of green space, plantings, trees, kind of keeping the attractive natural park feel of Northam Park. With that, the second one kind of goes hand in hand. We had several residents reach out and stress the importance of maintaining a neighborhood character in Northam Park. They didn't want it to be overly programmed. They understand it's kind of a central park for Upper Arlington, but they wanted us to be conscious of not overloading what was appropriate for the park, or doing things in a manner that wouldn't fit the general character that's already established in the park. As I mentioned before, there was a lot of support for an open shelter. That was something that a lot of residents brought up. But again, some concern that we do in a way that's appropriate to the park, and then also thinking about the best location so that can serve multiple users in the park. We did hear from a lot of residents in a general sense of desire for a high quality pickleball complex with several courts. There was a lot of interest in some people having it in Northam, some people suggesting other parks. And with that kind of variation, the consistency was they wanted to be good quality, and they wanted to have several courts in a single location. But the other thing that kind of went hand in hand with that, there was a desire to have the pickleball courts constructed in the near future. I think there's a lot of sense out there of seeing other communities, Worthington and New Albany, bringing new courts online, and desire to have that happen soon in Upper Arlington, just because of the popularity and the wide play of the sport right now. Another comment that we did receive from several residents was the desire to have Northam kind of be a tennis hub. They like the idea of having the clay courts in the park, and thought it would be a good complement of having asphalt courts going along with that. So if we go through that, we kind of took the feedback and factored that into the assessment. If we go to the next slide, we have some key considerations that kind of we saw coming out of this overall process as we looked at the use of the open space in the park. So we needed to be aware of kind of the unique character-specific space, kind of where it's located in the park, the fact that it's between the clay courts and the pool, the size, the location, the visibility was important that we paid close attention to that and any potential uses for that space. It's important that we consider potential future park development opportunities. So as we look at that, just because something can't happen here doesn't mean it couldn't happen elsewhere in our system. We also wanted to be aware of future improvements that were kind of in our 10 years capital improvement plan, like we shared a little bit at the last meeting. One thing that we wanted to kind of consider was kind of the mixed use characteristics of the Upper Arlington Park system and kind of the space limitations we're dealing with. So kind of what we mean by that, our parks over the years have kind of evolved where by the nature of the size of the parks, their location close to residents, the type of parks they are, the typical approach has been to provide smaller scale features in various parks instead of a single large venue. This is something we're dealing with in kind of all our uses. So as we look at the demand for athletic fields, you look at Dublin, at some of the outer line suburbs, there's a trend to have the athletic complex. All the soccer fields are in a single park. So, on Saturday morning when it's soccer time, everyone's going to the same park and has all the fields. Well, that's just not realistic for the types and space that we have available. So over the years, rather than having that large sports complex, Upper Arlington has taken the approach of having multi-use athletic field areas. So it may be soccer one day, and then the next day it's the outfield for the baseball diamond. We really need to kind of maximize the mixed use. And then even with that, doing it in a way that still complements the neighborhood character of the majority of our parks. So even though we have ball diamonds and we have football fields, we've been very careful to do them in a way where when they're not in use, it's still kind of available for that kind of general casual park experience. You see a similar thing with our outdoor pools. A lot of communities have gone towards the trend of having a large aquatic complex with the slides and the zero entry and everything kind of in one aquatic center. We've taken a different approach. It's kind of evolved over the years of having the 3 outdoor pools in different locations where each one offers something a little bit different and combined to give our residents a great variety of experiences, but each individual pool has a little bit of a specific experience, specific amenities that it's able to provide. We wanted to kind of keep this in mind as we look at the development of this space in Northam Park, that we want to be careful not to take the approach of over-programming over parks or trying to do too large of a complex. We feel that this approach brings the amenity to the neighbors in various parts of the community, while at the same time not overwhelming a single location. No one wants to live right across the street from the large aquatics complex. It kind of fits the neighborhood character of Upper Arlington better to have the smaller pools that we have available. So if we go to the next slide, we kind of came up with some adjustments to some of the concepts that were shown at the July 17th meeting. So a few key things we wanted to take with the approach that you see on here. We really wanted to enhance the connection between Tremont Elementary and the park. This is something we heard from the original Northam study. It's something we've been struggling with for quite a while, that hundreds of kids get out of school each day and kind of funnel into the small space between the pool and the current tennis complex. Even, besides the number of kids going through, there's also a visibility issue between the two. One of the changes we had this year with the fireworks in the new location, we were able to work with the schools and kind of open up the space behind the Tremont Elementary for fireworks viewing. But I can tell you, in that experience of viewing out there, there was a lot of separation between that and the park. I mean, you could be over behind the school watching the fireworks and you could hear the music, but you had like no visual connection with the park. So I think that was one thing that kind of real evident to us of how we could improve that connection between the school and park and really take advantage of the relationship between the two. With the approach that we are showing on here, another recommendation was to provide additional continuous open space and to expand the buffer between Tremont Pool and the tennis complex. So those kind of all go hand in hand. Another thing we wanted to kind of do with the improvements was to improve the park loop path for casual park use. You can see, rather than kind of keeping the narrow path that's between the pool and tennis today, wanted to see if we could take advantage of widening it, of meandering it, and then also that would allow us to fix some of the drainage issues that we currently experience in that area. Another recommendation that we are showing with this particular concept is to look for ways to provide shelter in key locations to meet user needs. So what I mean by that, early on, we kind of were looking at larger, like a 30 by 30 shelter, kind of a big picnic complex. We were struggling to find the right area for that. We mentioned the visibility issues for the area behind the pool. We didn't want it to locate it in one location where it only served tennis, or only served the pool, or only served the ball diamonds. So with this, we've taken the approach of looking at, can we provide multiple smaller shade structures in various locations? So you can see on the plan that's up there right now, there's a small shade shelter up by the pickleball courts. There's one by the ball diamond. There's one on in the tennis complex. So kind of splitting them up where multiple different users have a space to go, get out of the sun, get out of the rain, and have a little bit of a respite. Still trying to figure out exactly what those shelters should be, kind of the look of them and everything, but the idea of kind of dividing up the covered space in the park. One of the big things that you'll kind of notice on here with this plan, we are recommending pickleball courts in the near future to meet ongoing demand. It's kind of a unique opportunity with the space becoming available where we could look at we know pickleball courts will fit here. We know they're a good complement. It is a way that we could kind of more quickly provide pickleball courts to meet the demand that we are seeing in Upper Arlington. With that, we did say too, it'd be a recommendation to continue to explore future opportunities to provide additional pickleball courts in other parks. So one of the things we heard, as we mentioned through the feedback, was people were really wanting to see kind of that large pickleball complex. I know New Albany just opened up a complex with 16 courts. It's kind of, was the state of the art right now. There's a lot of desire from residents to provide that as well. We want to be careful with that of not over programming in any one of our parks. Kind of going back to what we talked about before with our approach to aquatics, with our approach to athletics, taking a similar approach with pickleball, where we're meeting that demand, but not overwhelming any one particular location or overwhelming the character of any one particular park. With that, in addition to the recommendations, we did kind of want to consider an alternate consideration. So if we go to the next slide, Brooke. Certainly, if the pickleball courts, if 6 pickleball courts didn't seem appropriate for the space, or there was desire to go a different direction, it still would fit having the 2 hard court tennis on there. So I think that would be a good kind of alternate consideration. It still meets a lot of the overall goals, but still not serving some of the demand for pickleball and being able to provide that quickly. So with this, we would recommend that if this approach was pursued, that the tennis courts at Fancy Burger Thompson would be converted to dedicated pickleball courts in order to provide that amenity. We wanted to kind of highlight some of the pros and cons with this approach. So one pro is that it does limit the number of different uses at Northam Park. We don't want to kind of over, like I said, we're trying to find that balance of not over programming the park. Does this do a good job of meeting that? Then also there would be kind of a natural complement between the asphalt tennis courts and the clay tennis courts. So those are both pros, but we also want to be aware of some of the cons with this approach. One con is that per our use studies that we shared earlier, there's really not an immediate need for additional tennis courts in the city. We're very well programmed with the tennis courts that are available at Fancyburg, at Thompson. There's really not a need to bring, and then as well as the tennis courts at the schools, there's not a need to bring additional courts online in Upper Arlington. Taking this approach would mean more of a delay to providing dedicated pickleball courts. It's something that's not currently in our 10-year CIP, and kind of foregoing the opportunity to provide them here would make it more difficult, more of a longer lead time to find another location that would be suitable. I know there's been a lot of conversation with Fancyburg. That's still something we would want to look into, but really with the work that's been done at Northam, we would now need to shift our focus to Fancyburg and start doing a master plan for kind of the east side of Fancyburg there to make sure the uses being proposed all work together, including the shelter, the service area that's over there, as well as the open space and the playground. Another kind of con is that if we did take the approach of looking for a larger pickleball complex in other parks, we really need to study to make sure that the park can accommodate the demand. It's great to say, yeah, let's provide 12 pickleball courts in one location. We think that's something that could be worth studying, but we need to make sure it's done in a way that the parking is appropriate to the location, that the parks are situated in the park in the right way, where they blend in with the surroundings, where they really kind of fit the character of the park. So with that kind of goes along with the final bullet point there. We need to find the appropriate size, location, design of a larger complex. We need some more study to kind of know how that would fit in somewhere within the Upper Arlington Park system. So with that, I'll kind of do a quick overview of the design and construction schedule. We touched on this a little bit already. But what we would like to do is go out to bid by the beginning of October and really kind of run the bids for about a month. That would allow us to bring the ordinance to city council prior to Thanksgiving and be ready to give a notice to proceed at the beginning of next year. With the building demolition happening during the winter, tennis court demolition happening in the late summer, and then wrapping up the project by the end of next year. So with that, Debbie, I don't know if you have any concluding remarks.
I think that the presentation is, what we have outlined, and now we're open to the public comments.
All right, so we can take some public comments. Just want to remind everybody, you want me to read the whole thing? Summarize. Basically, the Parks and Rec Advisory Board is here kind of an advisory capacity. We don't really make any decisions. We just kind of make recommendations. We would like to ask each speaker to be allowed 3 minutes per agenda item, and we reserve the right to limit the number of speakers or modify the time allotment if needed. So if we could get started with Todd.
Is that better? Okay. This was originally planned for downstairs, this meeting. And so I did a sort of a graphic, and the distances are much closer. So I'll try to, let me address a couple things before talking about this. The reason there's such a narrow pathway between the pool and the tennis courts is because when they did the pool, they put the fence from inside of the large tree there, the sycamore tree, to the outside of it. So they basically moved the fence line 20 feet closer to the tennis courts. They did the same with the fence along the walkway. It's roughly 20 feet, but I measured the square footage, and after they finished the new pool, the fence line consumed 9,000 square feet more of the park than it did with the original pool. So that's one reason the walkway is so narrow. I measured it on the ground by hand, and I put tapes down to show where the original fence was and the new fence was. So that's the reason that passageway is so narrow. The other thing is 6 pickleball courts is not enough, because they have easily 40 people showing up to the Fancy Bird courts, and they've got 8 courts marked out on the tennis courts. So they're over capacity at 8 courts. And part of the thing, like with Northam, is you want to have, you want to find as many good players to play with as you can. So if you only have 6 courts, it's kind of a social thing, and it's kind of a athletic thing. If people they're already established at Fancy Bird, and I was talking to one of the contractors who would be bidding on pickleball and or tennis, and he said, yes, there's room for 12 courts there. And I got 1 bid from one contractor, and this is at prevailing wage, $420,000 for 12 courts on the existing tennis courts there. So there's room to do that for pickleball. There's also room, the land that the city bought on Kyoka there, where the house was burned down. There would be room for 4 tennis courts to replace those tennis courts. Or you could switch it around, but noise-wise, it might be better to leave it on the tennis courts where they are. Because what I've been hearing is they haven't had too many complaints. And a lot of the pickleball people I've been talking to said they're perfectly happy to leave Northam as the tennis park and have Fancyburg as the pickleball park. And if those courts are filled up, 12 courts, Thompson is also an option. And I'll show you originally this was the plan before this, just less than a year ago. And to do courts 1, 2, and 3, put a new building, new sidewalks, new patio, et cetera. The lowest bid from Marker came in at 2.6 million. And that was over the 2.2 million, which the city had allotted. It was like 17% over. But the reason this consultant was hired, from what I'm hearing, is city council said, can you try to reduce the cost? They hired the consultant. But if you add 2.6 million, 3 courts, the building, sidewalks, landscaping, et cetera, and then if you take 9 courts, the other 9 courts, because we were talking about 12 courts, we were promised 12 courts. 9 courts at roughly 75,000, which is a bid I got about a month ago, prevailing wage. Let's say 700,000 plus 2.6 million comes out to 3.3 million.
Todd,
We're-
your time is up. Can you
Okay,
wrap up,
we're
please?
talking about 4.2 million. And if, I mean, they have unlimited time to speak. And I've done quite a bit of research, talking to contractors and having played down there, you know, over the years. And I've talked to Jeff about this quite a bit. I've talked to Debbie. I've been in, you know, tennis advisory meetings. But basically, what I think should happen is their, part of their presentation was that those buildings are beyond their, you know, beyond their useful life, et cetera, cracks in the foundation, et cetera. And I had this discussion with Jeff. There are no cracks in the foundation. It was a minor crack on a wall. It's not a structural problem. It's probably been there for 20 years, as far as I can tell. And if you don't replace the buildings, and if you do 12 hydro courts, you would have people, we would have people coming from swim and racket. The population is going up. We would have people there. All the schools are, you know, there are a lot more kids in the schools. We'd have more kids in our junior program, et cetera. And if you did 12 hydro courts, that's roughly $1 million. If you do new patio and sidewalks, that's 200,000, 100,000 for landscaping, 100,000 to refurbish.
Todd, I'm sorry. I really do need you to wrap up.
Okay, that's 1.5 million plus 400,000 for pickleball. That's less than 2 million. And then you have 2 million to do other things at other parks.
Thank
Period.
you. Yeah. Yeah, I don't, he could definitely send it to you, Debbie, and you could distribute it to the board if you,
Yeah.
your numbers and your sketch and all that, if you wanted to be able to provide that to us. Okay. Thank you, Todd. I really do need to cut you off there, but you're definitely welcome to any other comments that you need to make. You can send them along to Debbie for her to distribute to the board. You're, thank you. Okay, Wayne?
My name is Wayne Wookie. I just have a couple things, maybe a couple, just a question or two, and then just a thought or two to throw in. I did give a letter to you all that was just part of our input process, but I thought it was probably, you know, it was nice to be able to give that to you just for the detail that was there. So, you know, thanks for letting me give that to you and for taking a look at it. Just a couple of things. The two kind of major issues that some of this boils down to, I think, and one of them, of course, is, and I know you've all heard it, the noise of pickleball. and maybe Debbie, maybe you could answer too a little bit. Um, any research on noise levels or any studies in terms of, what the acoustics and noise level would be with 6 pickleball courts? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. All right. I got it. Well, anyway, that's one of the things that maybe if it hasn't been done or thought of, maybe I know in a lot of places where pickleball has been installed, sound is, the sound pollution has been a big complaint. So, I don't know what it would be, but it might be worthwhile to just investigate that a little bit as part of the process. The other sticking point seems to be that the timing of the location for a pickleball complex, and it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the things is kind of holding back building a quality pickleball complex at either Thompson or Fancyburg Park is that it couldn't be done sooner, that it would need to probably be done later down the road. And can understand why the pickleball people, want and need a facility now. So in the deliberations of this, if there's any way to reconsider the timing of a pickleball facility that would be larger and more adequate for the pickleball players at either Fancyburg or Thompson Park, could really solve a lot of problems. Because I think what will happen if those pickleball courts are at Northam, it's not going to be able to satisfy the need of the pickleball players, and they're still going to be gravitating to Lane and Thompson to play pickleball, and the tennis players and the pickleball players will be stepping on each other's toes for years to come. So if there's any way to facilitate that transition, I think that would be something that is a part of the letter, but it'd be something that we would, I would really, really recommend. So there are just a couple points. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other speakers who have slips that would like to speak? Okay. So now it's our opportunity. We can, as a board, we can ask questions to Jeff and to Debbie or address any of the points that were brought up by the other speakers. So does anybody have anything they want to start with?
We definitely did consider it, and I think that's still something that you as the board could consider. We were really trying to find that balance, but that's kind of what we did by trying to move the pickleball and create that buffer between any hard court use and the pool. Trying to create some open space through there. We want to be careful about not kind of doing unprogrammed open space here, or if we do open space, do it in a way where we're not kind of create an area for people to kind of hide out, anything like that. So that was something we kind of thought about through the design. But certainly, that was something that kind of came up, and that's kind of why we took the approach of trying to expand that buffer and provide more plantings, more open space in that area.
Do we have any comparisons of our parks in terms of the amount of green and unprogrammed space that exists, the size of the green space, so we can compare the amount of green space delivered by each park? And
like as far as benchmarking, comparing to other
communities? Because I'm one of the people who considers this my neighborhood park rather than my community park. And as a neighborhood park user, I like the idea of green space. As a matter of fact, I think you did a fantastic job on the Northam Park sidewalk, because I don't have to wear my sunglasses anymore when I go walking through that in the morning. And that is, rather than having shelters, I think something like that is just beautiful. It takes a while.
Yeah. No, we don't have, we don't have like hard numbers on that. I will say it's a unique challenge because it's pretty hard to compare Upper Arlington to a lot of the outlying communities because they're just in a little bit different situation. They have a lot more land available. They have land that they can kind of leave unprogrammed. That's part of the challenge we face with our park system. There's a real need to have all of our parks be multi-use.
I was thinking of comparing the amount of green space in Northam, Fancyburg.
Oh, in between the
um,
parks?
Between the parks.
Okay.
Do we have any parks that really bear the brunt of the programming and some who really should have more green space attached to them?
We don't. What we do have are areas where we've started to do planned natural use areas. So I know Sam and her team have been in here sharing with that before. One focus area is at Northwest Kiwanis Park. We have kind of the wooded areas up there. They have the prairie restoration area. So they've kind of been focusing on developing management plans for the naturalized areas we do have. Cardiff Woods, kind of the naturalized areas that are there, and making sure we're kind of doing our best to kind of take care of those, make them as diverse as we can, and still make them available to the community to use. It is. I mean, that's a part of the challenge of our park system as a whole. There's a lot of demands, a lot of interest to have different uses in our park, and only so much space that we need to try and work everything together.
And I would add to that, as Jeff mentioned, we do have some parks that their sole purpose is preservation and naturalized area. Cardiff Woods, he mentioned, Smith Park. We have several other within our park system that is the opportunity for experiencing nature. In some of our more active parks, we may have some small areas. I know Fancyburg we do on the, if my directions correct, I think the south side, thank you. And so we've added a few areas, Thompson has the wetlands in there. So where it's appropriate, we do. So that's why we have extended the buffer area in here to appreciate more of that natural area while still maintaining the park as an active use park. Sure, thank you for the question.
I just have a quick question on, sorry, the clarification of like the recommendation stuff, if you can say like one of these back up, what it'll be. I was just wondering where the fence lines would be for tennis in this diagram.
Yeah, if you want to pull that up, Brooke, we can talk about through that a little bit. So the tennis fence line would essentially follow the western edge of the gray area. So that gray area in the tennis complex with the kind of the one shade structure, the orange rectangle noted in it, that's the central plaza. It's kind of replacing the central plaza. It would run to the outside of that. So the tennis complex would still be enclosed. And then there would be backstop fencing, whether it's pickleball or tennis, either one's going to need a 10-foot backstop fence behind it on the open courts as well. And then coming around the corner. So
Well,
there would be some
The
fencing
north side
associated.
of the park building, that looks like concrete, or that would be fenced off. That would not be like,
Correct. The
open
north
to
side
it.
would be
Okay.
fenced off.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you can see that kind of the little line that comes across about 2/3 of the way up, that would be the entry. So that would be the fence with the gate right there.
okay, so that's
Yeah, if you look, oh, let's see if this one. Oh, there we go. Yeah, we can do that.
If I can ask, I just wanted to follow up with something that Todd brought up about the building itself and, how old is it, and kind of discussing the
Yeah.
raising of it and building a
Sure.
new one.
I'm not sure of the age of the building. Jeff may have that, but I know the integrity of the building. We had extremely heavy rains this past Thursday evening, Friday morning, and the facility was flooded. The courts drained. The patio and the building were flooded. And I know TJ and his staff were down there quite a bit trying to clean it up to be ready for some events later that evening, but it sits below grade. And as you may recall, part of our intentions here with the drainage is to rate, when we rebuild the courts, to build them even higher. So having a building sit that low is problematic. You can
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of the approach we would take with the new building. We had a conversation this week after seeing all the flooding, just kind of going over it again with the engineer and the architect. And really it's in addition to kind of correcting the drainage out there, it would be redesigned so it had an overland flow rate. So if, even if all our drains back up, it's not flowing through the building like it does today. So certainly we see a ton of flooding, the building getting wet right now. We don't specifically have any structural concerns. If we did, we would be addressing them right away. I think the bigger issue with the building is kind of the overall longevity. There are cracks in the building. There's rotting on the wood. I think it's a question of how much sense does it make to kind of to renovate about a 50-year-old building. I think it was 1972, 74. We can certainly get that date for you, but it's around 50 years old. How much sense does it make to kind of renovate it with all the issues that's having versus starting with a new building? It's really meant to meet the service needs that are out there and an architecture that complements the other buildings in the park.
And then the other question I had is, because I know storage is one of those things that has been brought up over the years from other sports entities. And so how much additional space is going to be given to storage in that building?
So the storage is really, especially from the athletics, is based on the existing use they have out there today. So it would certainly replace the storage that they have in the current building. It would also replace the temporary shelter that's in the building. I mean, that's really what was driving the storage area for athletics. They've really done a good job of in recent years of making sure they have just what they need for the season in there. They've become, I'd say, leaner in what they want to store in there. I know part of that's through COVID. They used to more just kind of store things in there and share. And now they're more taking the approach of assigning everything to specific kids so they have their equipment. So that's kind of the athletic storage. The park storage is something we've been taking a close look at. Even this week, we've been taking a real close look at, okay, do we have the right amount so we can get the rollers and the brushes and the wheelbarrows and everything that's needed for the courts. And then also some space to take care of what we need to for the park. So with the renovation going on there now, we want to make sure we have what we need, as far as for the irrigation, for the fields, we need some additional equipment to kind of take care of the park as a whole as well. So that's really what's driving the storage size on for both uses.
Any consideration or follow-up on the noise question that was brought up, the difference between tennis and pickleball, and what you considered, what any studies or information you may have on that? I think that's important too.
Absolutely, yes. I know Jeff has looked at a few different park offerings, and we will say that Northam Park, the location of the pickleball courts, would be the most distanced from homes within any other park opportunity that we have. So with that, we do have a very good buffer between the courts and a home where people would hear the noise. So I know you.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've done, we've tried to reach out to residents who live near the current mixed use courts where there is pickleball going on and see what concerns they have. This isn't a scientific study, but for the ones we've reached out to, we've had a general, yeah, we can hear it. We don't really think it's a disturbance. Certainly everyone would have a different perception with that. But I will say, the current courts, we're not getting complaints. People aren't calling in complaining about them. There certainly is noise that goes along with pickleball, and that's something we want to be aware of wherever it happens. So as Debbie mentioned, Northam is unique that it is pretty far for residents. This is a location where we can be as far away from residents as we can at any other park. I mean, we're looking at 550 feet to the nearest residents from this location. That is kind of a unique opportunity there. With pickleball and any other parks, it's something that we would need to continue to study, make sure we're being good neighbors, that we're kind of taking care of the residents that live near the other parks as well. There are things that can be done as far as walls or fencing or different approaches that can be looked at for noise issues. Certainly with the other parks, with Fancy Burger Tremont, we would make sure that if it's expanded, that it does become more of a destination pickleball, that the noise is still appropriate for those locations. So that's what we meant when we said there'd be more study involved at looking at larger complex in those locations. I will say, there certainly are other situations where pickleball and tennis are kind of located near each other. We don't necessarily see those being conflicting uses. It should certainly be a change in the park, but as much as anything, we want to make sure we're kind of being aware of kind of how it's impacting the overall surroundings.
I think we need to be careful not to forget the comments that the city manager made at one of our earlier meetings about the noise and his own scientific study of the berms at Fancyburg versus the other facilities, because he was talking about how he had parked his car next to Fancyburg, and because there are berms and there is vegetation, the noise was very slight. But Northam Park, you've got a straight shot without any interruption to the noise. So that concerns me. I also think someone asked if we had any information about the amount of noise generated by pickleball. And it was my understanding that when the New York Times article came out about the noise of pickleball and how it had impacted some Florida communities, it did make its way into the city, into the municipal center, and you're very aware of that study, of that information.
I have a quick question about the base bid versus the alternates. Are the clay courts and the main building and that one shade structure, is that the base bid still? And then everything else is listed as
So none of the
alternate?
shade structures are in the base bid. So
Okay.
based on the budget that's currently in the capital improvement plan, the base bid would remain the replacement of the service building, the addition of the tennis patio space, and then the 8 clay tennis courts. Everything beyond that would be an alternate that we would only be able to move forward with if either we get really good bids, bids come in lower than anticipated, and we're able to add things, or if council decided to do either an adjustment, or as they look at next year's capital improvement plan to add additional funds to provide the additional uses. So the base bid still remains the same, just the building and the clay courts.
Okay. And is there an order to like what alternates you would accept in what order, or is it really depend on cost left?
I think a
or-
lot of it would depend on cost. That's something, certainly something we would present to council. Any alternates would need to be approved by them as part of the construction contract. So it'd be a chance for them to weigh in. Like you said, part of it would depend on cost. If it comes in enough that like, hey, we can get one shade structure and we think it's gonna be a great benefit and it stays within budget, there certainly would be the opportunity to do that. We wouldn't necessarily want to rank and have the most expensive alternate be the number one, and we can't do anything if we don't do that one.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then with that information, if it comes in over budget, there is a possibility that that space might be left natural, at
Correct.
least for a time, if we
Correct.
don't have the money to move.
Yeah, that's part of what we're trying to do with this study. We want to go through this effort and have kind of a long-term plan for the space. Even if it doesn't happen now, we want to make sure we're doing the community engagement effort, we're doing the planning effort, that we had a real clear direction of where it could go in the future. But there's nothing to say that depending on how bids come in, that the base option would be to just restore it to lawn area.
Thanks.
One question I had when Wayne was talking about is, the timing of this, should we be considering moving up pickleball and doing something sooner? But if we were to put in, it made me think of this, if we put in the 6 pickleball courts that are being recommended at Northam, are you going to remove the nets from Fancyburg and Thompson for pickleball? Or will they remain?
At this point in time, we would allow both sports to continue and watch how play unfolds and determine that, because right now the opportunity exists for both pickleball and tennis. It's, putting a net out for pickleball, putting it away for tennis. So that'll allow both to take place, and we'd want to watch that and monitor that over time.
More of a curiosity, because Mary's distinction of how she sees a park as a neighborhood versus a community park, I think is a very good one. Did any pattern when you were the community feedback that was coming in? Were there any concerns that were more predominant with those who live right around Northam Park versus those who might consider it more of a community, use it randomly for bigger events?
You know what? We didn't necessarily ask residents where they live. We didn't try and get an address from everyone that we got and put on. So I don't know that I can answer it in relationship to where they live near the park. I will say we received a lot of comments, a lot of interest in the pickleball courts. We also received a lot of comments of maintain the neighborhood character, don't over program the park, make sure we're being smart with how things get added to it. So we didn't get to that level, but we certainly received feedback for both items.
I just think we weighted these for based off of the amenities that we're doing. So there was a weighting system. I just think it would be interesting if there was a weighting system for proximity and how you use these parks.
I guess I have an opinion about that in the sense that we don't have very many parks in Upper Arlington, and like a community park needs to stay a community park. Like we only have so many that are big enough to even have certain types of programming. And I think while it might be a neighborhood park for some people, we still have to realize that it has to serve the entire community.
Yeah, I kind of disagree because I think it goes against what we've been trying to do for decentralizing one place for one event. To me, would completely take away the community and the neighborhood feel of our park. Me personally, I like to go walk to Thompson and do the things I do there. I would stop doing those things. I'm not going to go get in my car and travel to Northam to do those things. So I think both have to be weighted, but I do agree.
It feels like that's actually suggesting that there should be diversity and we should have multiple things in the parks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, I think that's to the point of what Jeff was saying as we look at our park system as bringing more amenities closer to residents. So they don't have to drive from one park to another park for summer. So for instance, we have our 3 different pools instead of having one large aquatic complex. So that we have those, and each of those are uniquely different. The same with athletics. Yes, if you're playing football and to some extent softball and rec level baseball, you're going to Northam, but other sports are located in other parks. They are segmented out throughout the community. So we do have each of our parks are different and serve different areas, but then as a neighbor, it does have some neighborhood elements that the more frequent users would go there for those neighborhood kind of amenities. So we see it being a mix.
Is Northam the largest park?
Thompson by acreage is the largest park. Northam, I believe, is second, and that, however, Northam's probably the heaviest used.
I'm sorry, what?
Northam is utilized
Uh-huh.
outside with sports, and then Thompson also with a lot of the soccer and other uses.
Northwest Park isn't bigger than Northam Park? It just
Well, when
seems
you look
bigger to
at
me.
Northwest and Burbank together, there's
Yeah.
a different level of acreage, but
Okay.
Thompson is by far the largest park and has many more athletic fields.
Right.
And one other question. When is Fancy Bird? I feel like that got pushed I thought it was in 2025, but I feel like that's been pushed. Am I right? The redesign for that?
So we would begin the design effort in 2025. But the improvements, I think they're in 2026, the actual work beginning out
So we
there.
would design Fancyburg while we are implementing the final phase at Northam. And then move over and start implementing phases at Fancyburg.
So Northam wouldn't be in construction at the same time as Fancyburg.
No.
Okay.
We would complete construction at Northam before we would start Fancyburg with current plans.
I'm sorry, Fancyburg is actually scheduled to begin in 2027. Would be the first year of construction. So with that, kind of the approach we had been anticipating is that master planning effort would begin in 2025. We would begin detailed design in 2026, and then construction would begin in 2027. Part of what's driving that, just kind of a high level summary, 2024 is the Northam Tennis Complex is the large project. We do currently have the Devon Toddler feature on for 2025. And then the Northam East Athletic Fields in 2026. So the Fancyburg improvements wouldn't begin until after those projects are complete.
Does the board have anything else they want to discuss about this? Is the board prepared to provide a recommendation to city council based on the recommendations from the Parks and Rec Department on what they'd like to see for that space in Northam?
I'd say that given the length of time between now and when city council develops a recommendation, maybe we should wait for a couple months.
So, I mean, it's the board's pleasure to what the timing you feel
I
is
don't know.
appropriate. I will say, as Jeff outlined in the timeline, we are working with a design firm to start bid documents and have whatever would be in this space as a bid alternate. It doesn't mean council would accept it at that point in time, but at least gives us direction for what would be included in the bid documents as an alternate. That would then come before council to vote on in November. So,
But you're going to do that regardless of our recommendation here tonight, right? So
it would be, good to have a direction on, what its use is, but the size of the asphalt area is generally the same. So it just gets into having a very solid cost on implementation. On the use of either the
I
recommended.
guess, does it make sense for us to do it tonight, or could we do it at the October meeting? Is that what you're thinking, Mary?
I mean, yeah, I mean, if that's the case, then then we would still be moving forward with one of the options for the design firm to include in the packet. Into the bid packages.
So would you like a recommendation from us tonight for that?
If you're in a position to do it, then it's, it's the board's choice, but we do need to work with the design firm to develop the bid packets within the month of September so they can put it out to bid October 4th.
Yeah. Well, if we have a majority right now that's up for putting together a recommendation, we can do that, and then we can vote on it. And if anybody's not comfortable with that, then they can vote against it. Do we have a majority that would like to do that tonight? Okay. Sorry, Mary, I think we have a majority. So does somebody want to should we propose the recommendation then? Or
A motion to support?
the motion of support? Do we need to, I know that there's always been this, that's the actual language
Right.
we're using.
Typically, it's a motion of recommendation or motion of support of our staff recommendation.
Do we have somebody who would like to make that motion?
Recommendation is the slide in front of you.
Yeah, our recommendation is the slide with the 6 pickleball
Yeah.
courts.
Yeah.
Brooke, were you able to put together his motion? Can you read it back? Yeah.
A motion was made by Smith to support the Northam Park Open Space Recommendation Plan as proposed by the Parks and Recreation staff.
That includes the 6 pickleball courts. Can we add that? Okay.
Northam Park Open Space. Yeah. A motion was made by Smith to support Northam Park Open Space, the Northam Park Open Space Recommendation Plan as proposed by the Parks and Recreation staff.
Do we want to add the pickleball, or just as this is? Is that sufficient, Debbie?
I mean, you're supporting the recommendation for the minutes. In case the attachment and the minutes ever are separated, it would be good if you would say that what the recommendation is in the motion. That way it's clear for anybody who reads the minutes years ahead. The recommendation is. Yes. Correct. That is, yeah, so we'll do pickleball and then the alternate, so that if for some reason council may want to revisit it, it has the recommendation to go forward with pickleball with an alternate opportunity potentially for tennis.
Did you get that, Brooke? Okay. Does anyone want to second the motion? Do we want her to read it back again? Any other discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. All right, the motion carried.